Welcome, everybody. And we're excited to have you today here at our Solutions Forum on supporting our seniors during COVID-19. On behalf of myself and my colleagues on the Pathways to Adult Success project, I would really thank you for participating today and working together to share your wisdom on this very important topic. We've been overwhelmed by the response to this. We had over 180 people sign up. There's more than 100 folks on the line now. And that's fantastic because we have folks from K-12 school systems, we have folks from higher ed, we have folks from nonprofits, all working on different parts of this problem of how do we support our seniors in these extraordinary times. And essentially what we're gonna try to do is do some crowdsourcing and pool our wisdom and knowledge and insights and raise questions with each other, share ideas we have and any resources we have. And we're gonna really organize today in three sessions on three different parts of this challenge of supporting our seniors. First, focusing on those who need to earn credits or complete requirements to graduate. Then speaking about those that are really on track to graduate, but were not able to get a post-secondary placement in place before schooling became remote. And then finally, those seniors which may have a placement, but are reconsidering or facing additional challenges because of the COVID-19 experience. And then we'll conclude thinking about how should we keep this learning community going during this time so we can keep helping each other. And before we start, I just really hope this also finds everybody doing well and hanging in and pushing forward during these sort of extraordinary and very challenging times. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Amanda, who's just going to tell a little bit how we're going to manage to try to communicate with this large group today, but still create an environment where we can share and exchange ideas.
Thank you, Bob. So as Bob mentioned, we have quite a massive crowd today. We're looking at about 114 at this point, still coming in. People are trickling in. But given that we are in such a large group, what we're asking is that everybody remain muted unless you are speaking, or if you're the lucky one that Bob calls on you. Additionally, it would help if you put your name in. It would help Bob if you put your name, which you can do up by which you can change yourself. If you have questions as we're going through the presentation and through the conversation, please feel free to use the chat function. We do have Ann Mario who will be reading those and helping Bob out with that. And additionally, if you have resources that you think would be helpful for everyone, please put it in that chat function as well, because we will compiling these resources and presenting and sending them back out to everyone along with this presentation and added follow-up. And I think that might be everything.
Great, thank you, Amanda.
Because I'm in a meeting and I have to.
All right, and we just ask everybody to keep yourself muted as we do have a very large group of folks on today, which is wonderful. So let's get going. The first group of seniors we know they're going to need supports this spring and immediately are seniors who still need to earn credits or complete requirements to graduate. What do we know about this situation right now? All right, well, we do know, and we've been looking closely at all the state documents that states have been putting out about how they're trying to adjust to the COVID-19 environment with their graduation requirements. And we know that most states now are waiving or allowing local districts to waive graduation requirements beyond the total number of credits and the distribution of credits students are asked to get, but things like an end of course test or other manifestations of college and career readiness that they were being asked to demonstrate. Most states to date are waiving those requirements or allowing districts to waive them and saying, let's focus on just making sure students earn the right number and distribution of credits. In addition, some states are encouraging or requiring local districts to view all students who are essentially what they're calling on track to graduate at the end of quarter 3 or the first 9 weeks of the second semester. And states are either defining that as being enrolled in the courses you needed to graduate, or in some cases they're qualifying and say enrolled and passing in those courses to graduate. So when schooling started going on break in mid-March, if you were on track at that point, some states are saying and others are encouraging districts to say, let's assume that student will continue that way, and let's say they completed the requirements for those courses and they can graduate. This started in Virginia, which was one of the first states to come out with guidance, and is now spread broadly and particularly across the South. Some states have taken a slightly different approach, and they've identified multiple ways students can earn credits for needed courses, local tests, project, work experience, and they're leaving it up to individual districts or schools to decide what method students are using to demonstrate this completion and whether they have done so. And some examples like this are New Mexico and Texas. It's important to recognize that not all states have issued graduation requirement guidance yet. Some of those that have not have said it's forthcoming, and they've given various dates for that in the near term. And the best source we found to keep track of this is from Excel and Ed, which is a database on state graduation requirements under COVID, which they are updating daily. And you can find most states, all states that have requirements, you can find them there. And those states that don't, you can often find the date. Two more things we know before we're gonna do a little poll to see where folks are, is that we know that in the, that there are a substantial number of students who every year have got to sort of pass their classes or complete the requirements in the spring of their senior year to graduate. And we know over time, many schools, often in partnership with nonprofits, have built up support systems to help make this happen. And many of them were based on sort of frequent face-to-face, sort of nagging and nurturing encounters to keep pushing those kids forwards, to make sure they get their work done, to make sure they study for their tests, to make sure they're aware of what they have to do. And this was driven by teachers and counselors and mentors and often nonprofit partners. And we know this has been disruptive, right? Because this was essentially conducted as a face-to-face activity, and now we have to figure out how to do it as a remote activity. And then the final thing we have to keep in mind, right, is we know even with some of these flexibilities states are announcing and districts are announcing, there will still be students who are short multiple credits, and even with efforts that can be done remotely, probably will not meet those requirements and will need either summer school or in some cases, a 5th year of high school. One challenge is a number of places are already indicating that summer school itself will be virtual. And again, how to make connections with those kids that may be feeling disconnected because they just learned they're not graduating and they're not sure about where their futures are. And also, in some states are saying it's okay if they stay for a 5th year, which, can have some pluses and some minuses, but thought will have to be put into, if that happens, how that 5th year is used to really benefit the school's advancement and their pathway to adult success. So with that background of what we know, we want to ask a poll question, which is, in your state, school, or community, has guidance been provided on how to modify graduation requirements during COVID-19? So this poll will give us some instant results and will let us see where we are as a learning community on this question of, has guidance yet been given in our community about graduation requirement modifications? Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds. See if there's a last minute surge among any of the categories to go against the dominant trends we're seeing. All right, well, it looks like that, about a third or not quite are aware of, there have been modifications that are aware of them. A quarter or so believes they have not been made or they're not aware of them. And the majority, over half of folks, are just not sure. So that really, brings us to our first issue, which is that even getting good information on what is happening in terms of graduation requirements is still uncertain for many folks on this call. And we have to, many folks on this call are people that are more likely to know than average, and then as many students and families are. So I would say that's our first interesting group finding here we found collectively, is that between know and not sure, the majority of folks are not clear about how graduation requirements in their community are being modified under COVID-19. Okay, Amanda, I don't know if we can close the poll now. All right, as we're working on that, I can move it down. And so the question, we're now going to open it up to all of you. And again, we're going to try to use the chat function to, ask a question, share something you're working on as a potential solution or a resource. And so the question is, even with graduation requirement and flexibility, some seniors will need support to graduate. How can we provide that support under COVID-19? So take a minute. If you have some insights on that question, please share them in the chat, and then we might ask some people to, expound upon them further. So we'll give everybody a minute to think and respond. In particular, I am curious if we have some of our school districts are on the line, if the school district has begun thinking about how to approach this. And also if there's some nonprofits that work with schools, if they've been thinking about how to approach this. All right, so we're hearing that some folks are offering virtual office hours in Google Classroom and Offices. From Sarah out in the Puget Sound and the West, we're hearing that some Washington districts are using paras and RTI MTS coaches to contact individual families and connect one-to-one, trying to, as we know, to build that nagging and nurturing, you need a relationship or to reestablish relationships. So they're trying to do that. And they're mobilizing some of the folks that have the connections to do that. Other folks, again, are using virtual office hours. And combining that with tutoring. In one place, they're using that, and they're also concerned about kids that are trying to pass their AP classes. And again, that's important both for their transcripts, but also for earning college credit. We're being asked to be sensitive to where students are. We have students who have parents or family members who are positive and their priorities are not academics. It's an incumbent on us to communicate with them in their preferred method and help them understand what they need to do to make to graduation and matriculate into college, right? It's a very challenging time, right? And this is maybe not top of mind for everybody, so we have to find a way to be sensitive. At the same time, the concern with so much of this work is that as folks are focusing on these most immediate things, something very important like completing your requirements to graduate could go to the side. And then, come the fall, it's sort of, we have out of school, out of work youth that are disconnected from institutions, and all that much harder to sort of bring them back. Good advice here on the idea of forming student support groups. Connecting students in similar situations via virtual tools to build community and support, right? We know how important peer group connections are in general, and then using those peer groups to help kids help each other could be a very powerful strategy. From Gil in Riverside County, we're hearing that our 23 school districts are working on a number of fronts. They're trying to get access with devices and hotspots. Also working on guidance on grading practices with a sentiment of hold harmless during the conversation. We're also discussing downstream issues for underclassmen, right? So that's a challenge. Like, how do we, many people are using pass-fail or credit, no credit solutions, just so, enough, getting a good enough is good enough in this current environment. Are folks having there's been some districts which have reported, that just in general, they're losing connection with some of their high school students, right, in general. Then it makes it all the more harder to sort of restore this conversation if even initial contact has not been made. If some of our school districts been able to find a way to contact most of their high school students is the first step. Another thing some districts and some states have been thinking about, right, is how to create multiple ways to demonstrate your competency, recognizing that not all kids will be able to have like, electronic computer or connections, and therefore things like credit recovery programs online may not be accessible. So can they also be offered a sort of a project that lets the class succeed, or even, an end of course local test, where materials could be provided non-virtually. Interestingly enough, some states are even recommending looking at things like work experience. Are there things the students have done this year in extracurriculars and through working or other means which demonstrate a sense of competency in the area of being investigated? So some states are really stressing a need to think creatively about ways that students can demonstrate competency, but through varying means and modalities given the circumstances. Sarah is pointing out again that in Washington that the smaller, more rural districts are having more success than the larger ones. Perhaps issues of scale and the total numbers of kids to reach out to. All right, I'm going to give this just a couple more minutes, and then we'll move on to our next topic. In Osceola County in Florida, they're saying the leadership team is taking on the role of reaching out to students not heard from, which takes some of the stress off teachers so they can focus on instruction and providing feedback. And I think that's a key theme throughout this, is we have to think, how can we mobilize the people power to reach out and support these students, right? Because when schooling was a face-to-face situation, some schools, even maybe many schools, had nonprofit partners embedded in the process, had different folks beyond just say the teacher and the counselor involved in reaching out and supporting kids. And as we said, many of those have been disrupted, but we have to think of how to get them reestablished or how to establish new connections with other adults from the school. Because the point is right, is that teachers are under a lot of stress right now just to deliver core instruction while they're also caring for their families. All right, Gil from Riverside is telling us they have put together 5 virtual professional development sessions for K-12 school counselors on best practices in a virtual environment. Over 500 people have signed up for this series so far. I think that's a critical point as well. I think even today was an example of that, is that people are hungry, both for ideas and for a community of folks trying to understand this together. So to Gil's point, we need to think about how can we provide some resources to those people who are asking to do this work, but also in a way that brings them together and helps keep that community going and not make it seem like such an isolated challenge under challenging conditions. All right, well, as we said, we are going to keep collecting resources. So if you think of more resources, more ideas, things to share, please add them to the chat as we go along or send them to us directly afterwards. But for now, I'm going to ask us to move ahead to our second group of seniors we need to think about. And those are seniors who, are basically have their graduation requirements in hand, or they will without much of a struggle, but they actually didn't secure a post-secondary placement before schooling became remote. And what do we know about this group of students? Well, we know that actually in March, April, and May are often some of the key months for seniors to apply to open access four-year institutions and community colleges. This varies across the nation and by district and by state. It's not uniform, but in many places, attention is first paid to those students applying to competitive schools and state university systems that have earlier deadlines. And then it shifts to the students moving to schools that have more rolling deadlines or open admission policies that go into the spring and early summer. In many cases, students depend on supports provided by their high school or affiliate nonprofits in making connections to these institutions. In many cases, or some cases, these institutions and community colleges often send representatives to high schools to have both information sessions and actually help kids directly on the spot complete applications. And then finally, on top of that, almost all higher education institutions are closed with staff working remotely. They may very well reopen on different schedules and make different adjustments to application deadlines. This is going to make it harder for prospective students to get questions answered or receive accurate information, right? They're not going to be uncertain. Are they open yet? Can I talk to somebody? Will somebody answer the phone? We had some folks try this out and we heard back that, in many cases, because it is remotely, you basically get a telephone tree and you have to really understand like what the name of the office is you're asking for to get your question answered. It doesn't just necessarily say, if you're trying to apply, press 1. Some places have done that more easier, but other places it's not quite to that place yet. So we're gonna have challenges of even getting information from higher ed institutions about what they're doing about application deadlines and reopening schedules. Okay. We also know that this is a concern. This group of kids is that if things slide, and they easily could, right? Because again, we're all these immediate needs and all these immediate stresses within their family and their communities and their schools. But if students, and the focus first on getting kids to graduate, but if students graduate and they don't have a post-secondary placement, they will then be without sort of institutional supports, right? They'll be out of the K-12 system and not in the higher education system, which means it'll be very hard after that happens to provide them information on rolling admissions, mid-year starts, how to apply. And in the state guidance we've seen is that by and large, states have not quite got to this issue yet. In a few states, we found some mention of it. We found the strongest mention of it in Colorado, where Colorado said the Department of Education was going to work with its higher education institutions to try to figure something out. That's as far as they got. But as I said, overall, this could be a real out of sight, out of mind problem with serious effects for students and communities. So that brings us to our second poll question to see where we are as a group and how different people are experiencing this, which is, has your state, school district, or local higher education institution started to address this challenge of students that didn't have a post-secondary placement when schooling became remote? So whatever work we have to do to get them placed now has to happen remotely. Okay, well, let's give us a couple more moments. We've got about 64% people have voted. We're up to 123 participants. We've had one comment in the chat box that said there should be an option for yes, but super messy and not aligned across schools, which might just be the sort of the statement for this period of time on almost everything, unfortunately. All right, well, as we can see here, and I find this a little bit heartening that we have a third, at least a solid third, saying yes, that folks have started to think about this challenge. Only 20% saying no, definitely it's not on the radar screen yet. And then again, not dissimilar to the other question about graduation requirements, we have a close to 50% saying they're not sure. So again, some real challenges here with sort of information dissemination. All right, we're already getting some comments because you're anticipating where we're going next, which is, what can we do about this? We've heard one comment is, to elaborate on the poll, I would say it's a challenge. As my students apply to post-secondary options for October to December, at this point, we're assisting them with reading financial aid packages and deciding where to enroll. And that's a great point, and that in fact anticipates our third question, which we'll talk about students who actually have a placement, but maybe reconsidering or having challenges completing from application to enrollment. But what have folks been experiencing? We had a good third there that said that their district or school or higher education institution has been at least thinking about what to do about these kids. For those folks, what have you been thinking about? What are some of the issues you're facing, and what are some of your initial solutions? I'm also very curious. I know we had a number of higher education institutions sign up. If we have some higher ed folks on the line, I'm very curious about if you know what your higher ed institution is doing about thinking about outreach to students that, you know, we're on the cusp of applying, let's say, before schooling became remote, but have not been able to do that because of the closing of schools as a face-to-face encounter. We're hearing that college advancement mentors are reaching out to students to make sure they transition from high school to post-secondary still happens. Both are using tech solutions to stay in touch and provide guidance and bridge communications between post-secondary and high school. We're hearing lots of stuff going on. School partners in Denver. Georgia's using its collaborative partners, university system, technical college, student finance, K-12 to coordinate efforts related to Hope scholarships and dual enrollment, to permit higher ed to finalize plans and reignite those without firm plans. Our technical colleges will be a great bridge to our students, and many students are already dual enrolled with a connection. So that's a great point, right? Is that some students already have connections through dual enrollment, and that's something to build upon, and also a way to help us locate those students. Because it seems to me that one challenge is going to be identifying who this pool of students is. In some schools and some systems, it may be relatively easy. Maybe in that information may have good order when we went out for our first extended spring break in many cases, and then much longer closures. But I have a sense too from some discussions we've had that part of the challenge is that people were not anticipating the need to organize that information in that way. And so one of the first challenges is really knowing even which students are in this situation, to be able to first then figure out how do we reach out to them and provide supports and experiences and options and opportunities. We're hearing that Tacoma, representatives from CBOs, institutions, and other schools in our school local district are meeting together this week to see what collaborative action planning we can do to help communicate systematically about resources, college options, financial support. So that's excellent. Tacoma, we are going to be really hoping to hear what you learn next week, and we hope you share that with us. Because clearly this requires sort of community-wide solutions, and the fact that you have a system in place to bring together CBOs, institutions, higher ed institutions, and the school districts to discuss this is going to put you better positioned than most. So we're going to actively encourage you to please share what you learn. We're hearing that in Buffalo, their goal using GearUp and other things to communicate email, text, phone with every high school senior, 2,500, to navigate their individual challenge. This is additional to the work our school district's counselors are doing. So again, this is a very great example of leveraging other infrastructure that exists and other partners to help spread that work, but really also doing it right, which is let's go after all the kids and make a connection with all of them and figure out what they need. We have this point that we need to think about paid internships and apprenticeship programs and gap year programming. That's another great point. Another idea that's been tossed around that will require some federal or state action, but is the idea of trying to expand AmeriCorps. So some of these students could have a year of giving service, but combine that with counseling supports and application supports and post-secondary planning supports. So they're getting the supports they need, while they're also spending time helping other kids. There may be locally ways to organize that too, even absent sort of a formal AmeriCorps program. And we're hearing that in Texas, a group of nonprofits and other stakeholders, including 2-year and 4-year associations, to coordinate a common location for students to find information on enrollment process changes. That's wonderful. That's one thing I really think is needed. And again, we really would hope you share your experience with that and provide details on how you're organizing that so we can share with others. Because we are gonna have to try to create a place. Hopefully things will settle enough that it can be face-to-face in the summer, or if not, to do it virtually, where we can kind of create one-stop shops for our students, where they can both hear about options, get support in enrolling, help get their financial aid in order for that, and maybe even knock off some of those enrollment forms that happen during the summer that throw kids off track, right? How can we create a one-stop awareness to application to enrollment to provide kids that need that opportunity and missed it because school is remote, to get it in one centralized place, right? So it's not trying to figure out all these things individually. It's a good point that undocumented students are unable to do AmeriCorps. So again, we may want to think about localized solutions that don't prevent that idea from happening, but are not dependent on documentation.
Bob, I'm not sure that you caught, there was a remark about a group in Denver, a group of colleges and post-secondary institutions that reached out to the school folks about virtual opportunities for students to learn more about the colleges. And the high school people were relaying that information to the seniors.
That's wonderful. And I also see that we got a comment that some Denver metro area colleges have provided remote meeting opportunities for prospective students. I'm sharing that with students who may be interested. So that again is for institutions of higher ed, it's going to be critical. And I'm sure almost all are thinking about how to do it, but it will be critical to figure out for those higher ed institutions themselves to work with community partners to conduct some of this outreach, because some students may be disconnected from school or not able to connect with school, but are still in the community and can still be reached through other means. So I do think we have to think about how we can do that outreach from the school, but also from higher ed. All right, we hear that in San Antonio on our one-stop shop idea called Cafe College, where we assist students of all ages and grades in completing college steps, financial aid assistance, and scholarship research. We are currently working on virtual advising and assisting students via Zoom, email, text, and phone communications. That again is wonderful, and we really encourage you to share any and all details you can with how you're doing that. If there's a link you can share that people can look at, because really that is, I think, a core idea of how to create these one-stop shop opportunities and support systems for our kids in this current environment. I must say, I find the responses to this question encouraging. It seems like there's a lot of good inventive thought going on out there. There's a lot of collaboration happening. There's a lot of people working together cross-sector-wise to make this happen. It's just an impression. It almost seems like there's been easier to galvanize around this one than some of the helping kids graduate who are missing credits.
Bob, not to interrupt, we have Susan McKim. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. She's got her hand raised to ask to chat.
Hi, Susan.
Susan, are you there? Okay, go ahead, Bob.
All right. Well, again, as the people get more ideas, we've had a rich sharing here. Please do add on to our list of ideas and resources and questions. And I'm going to then move us on to our third group of seniors. Let's see. In the third group, right, we heard about this in the chat already as a foreshadow, is that we have some seniors who have a post-secondary placement or perhaps a couple of options, but are rethinking because of the circumstances of COVID-19. What do we know about this? Well, here we just have some initial surveys and really media accounts. So it's hard to get a firm grasp on the size and scale of this challenge, and hopefully we can just get reporting from the field, from our diverse learning community on the call today on the extent this is happening. But we have heard from available sources that some students are looking for options closer to home, understandable. Some are concerned about the costs and the impact of COVID-19 on family employment and income, and will they be able to actually pay for the opportunities they've already been accepted to. And as a result, some are considered delaying enrollment for a year, which could be a logical and reasonable thing to do. But again, in some cases, it could be what students feel is necessary, but not quite fully understanding how that may cut them off from institutions they need to find something the following year. And then, as we all know, as the Pathways to Adult Success Learning community has been working on individually and collectively in many ways, is that there's, even in the best of times, there is a substantial gap between acceptance and enrollment. There's multiple steps involved from when you have that acceptance to when you're actually ready to show up at the post-secondary institution in the fall with a class roster and all the steps that are required taken care of. And often there's many steps along the way, which we could see getting much more complicated in the current environment, and much more likely that students could get 4 right and still get tripped up on the 5th. Not the least of which we know, is that financial aid forms are typically due in May, if not before. And again, that was, people were gearing up for that just as the disruption occurred. So that brings us to our poll question for this category, which is, in your district, schools, and communities, are the normal supports provided to help students to get from acceptance to enrollment in post-secondary institutions at risk because of COVID-19? So people have worked long and hard to put these supports in place, but with this sort of disruption and disequilibrium, there's a real risk that they could be undermined or not able to function as they normally do. And we're seeing what people are learning on the ground. And again, we'll give you a few seconds to respond. We've got about halfway, 50% response rate so far. Okay, and as people make their final votes, we've already got sort of an encouraging thing in the chat saying, though at risk, district, post-secondary, and community systems have joined forces to support current and upcoming post-secondary students, ranging from relocation and similar financial challenges and outreach using pre-existing relationships and structures, and advisors are staying in contact with these students using text, Naviance, and similar tools combined with virtual advising, doing their best. So there's some stress, but in this case, we hear the encouraging news that even with the stress, the existing structures are proving resilient enough to still sort of keep pushing forward. As we can see here in our poll results, fully 62% of our community feels that these supports are at risk. That's certainly a red flag for all of us. Only 4% are confident that they're not at risk, and a third are not sure. So here, a pretty strong sentiment that stuff that's been in place without some additional effort and inventive thinking and innovative solutions and community efforts might not be in place because of current circumstances. So let's dig into this. What are folks thinking about? Questions, things, how we might approach this, inventive ideas of how to work around the difficult circumstances, how to keep those structures in place, even though they've been mightily challenged by the environment. You know, one group I saw were a couple that we had folks from signed up from like Dallas and Los Angeles and the San Antonio, different Promise program efforts and sort of educational partnerships. I'm wondering about how, in Tacoma and others, I wonder how you're thinking about this. A very different angle. I'm wondering about how we keep keep track of who these kids are, right? It's a big sort of data-based challenge. So I don't know if Zan from Panorama was able to make it, but I'm wondering about if there's anybody trying to build technological or data tools to help with this. Thinking about our friends at the Chattanooga Ed Fund, I know who have done a lot of work in this advising space, and wondering how they are sort of keeping their structures intact in this environment. And finally, I know that, I don't know if she was able to make it, but I know that Lisa from the Massachusetts Department of Education was telling me last week about how they've been building sort of individual guidance plans for kids and training schools on how to use them. And I'm just wondering if they've been able to sort of use that as a tool to keep track of which kids might be in this boat and who might not. All right. So we hear that as much as possible, I think one-on-one outreach and engagement is key, especially in high poverty urban areas like Buffalo. Yes, very much so. That's been, people that work in those environments, that's our experience. This is about personal connection, and it's hard to do that. It's hard to get around that. It's how to keep finding ways to make that direct connection with folks they know and trust and have some sort of relationship with, and how to sort of be able to have the time and energy to sort of like persistently find the kids and connect with them. We also hear from Buffalo that we already have lots of services woven together through Say Yes Buffalo. So just trying to transition those to virtual and distance methods, mentoring, peer mentoring, find aid plus basic needs. We're hearing again to remind ourselves of the that I've been working with my students whose parents have lost their jobs as a result of COVID-19 to work on financial aid appeal letters to see if colleges can help cover the additional costs that families can no longer afford. So that's going to be a huge factor, right? We know we're having unemployment like we've never imagined before. And we know that many families stretch themselves to the max to be able to enable their kids to go to college. And this is going to really stress that. So again, how can we build these community solutions so people are not alone and having to solve it themselves? How can we call on our higher ed institutions and those that support them and their supporters to find ways to help mitigate these challenges? So students and families that have worked really long and really hard, often to become first generation college kids that are carrying the banner not only for themselves, but their whole family, that they are not knocked off track by this crisis. And there are ways to sort of keep moving them forward and not have that pure dollar thing stand in the way. Massachusetts here, they're trying to figure out how to use the MyCap, which is that individualized guidance planning for college and career I talked about, to keep virtual advising going. It is locally administered, and we're starting to survey districts on what the status is. And again, to our friends in Massachusetts, as you learn about good success stories and challenges, we encourage you to share those with us. Because again, that is some tools and methodology that other folks can learn from. I feel like not sending out a robotic-like response is key to engaging seniors in their transition from high school to higher ed. Personalizing messages and asking students how they're doing during this time, I feel goes a long way. I've had more responses this way than any other method format, so I echo the previous points of doing it one-to-one. And even beyond that, the key point you're making is to really make this first about connecting with them as a person, and showing that you care about them as a person in their future. You're not just, as you said, it's not just an automated machine sending a reminder, but you're first reestablishing that human connection. There's some research out there that when human connections get broken, you first have to spend some time reestablishing them. You can't just assume you can pick up right where you left off. So really first reestablishing and building that relationship, and then moving from that to giving the guidance they need. Okay. Chattanooga answered my call. From Chattanooga, we're making use of our student information system to make sure ed professionals and advisors are aware of where students are on the post-secondary trajectory, and using match and fit tools to provide students with post-secondary options that would still be a good fit match, even if they were even if they've had to change plans a bit. So again, our friends at Chattanooga, and again, I encourage them in any way they can to share what they've done and how this works, have been building data tracking tools for a while. And again, having that infrastructure in place is sort of helping put them ahead of the game a little bit to first answer this first question of where were our kids when schooling became remote, and where do we have to take them from there, and what adjustments do we have?
I'm going to jump in here while we wait for Bob to come back and read some more of these chat features or suggestions. Our TRIO program here in Washington has been pushing one-to-one contacts with students as well as parents. We made a needs assessment to assess family needs and try to gather resources to address them, such as food, cleaning supplies, and school supplies. Our goal is to make sure parents and students know that we are still here to serve them as we help our students read through their financial aid letters, apply to schools, etc. Rachel points out students can pick up a smile in the voice. I feel that it's very important that students hear a voice they're familiar with. And then another one in Puget Sound, encouraging focused data sharing across colleges, districts, and community-based organizations to support individualized virtual advising support. And the folks in Puget Sound are requesting sample data sharing agreements that could work across districts, colleges, and CBOs. So if you have one of those, please send it to the address that she's offered. Yeah, I think that pretty much catches us up on the messages. Thank you all for your contributions.
I think we could also send, if you guys have those resources, to send it to info@pathways to adult success, and that way we can share that with everyone, because we will be following up from this presentation with all of these resources and everything as well. So that way we can reach everybody. As far as the next portion of the slide until Bob comes in is actually dealing with the next steps. I'm sure there's more, and he may want to jump back in back to where he was when he comes back in. However, but the next step is actually our last set of polls. This last poll is what role should the Pathways, us as a community, learning community, play going forward to help address these needs? Like, how can we best serve the community, serve the seniors, and everybody therein? And so we have a few questions that we're going to ask you guys to fill out. There are 3. I'll go ahead and get that launched for you right now. So if you all would go ahead and take a few moments to answer those 3 questions, it might take you to scroll down through that polling option, and then I'll share that with you as well.
So I'm going to read a few more suggestions. Riverside County has offered a data sharing MOU, so feel free to contact them, or they can send what they have to Pathways to Adult Success. And here is a big picture reminder from Nolani Linder that many institutions, especially the smaller ones, and I think he's talking about smaller colleges, are getting hard hit by COVID-19 in their own ways. They may not have all of the same student supports or level of financial aid packages immediately available when they reopen. While we hope they will emerge stronger and even more responsive post-COVID-19, as good partners, we should be aware, talking with colleges, of the modifications they may have been forced to make and help communicate those to prospective or incoming students.
We've got a little less than half of you responded to the current poll. I'll give it a couple more seconds for everybody to go in, and then we can and then I'll reveal where everybody stands with that. Resoundingly, it looks like everybody thinks that we should really try to continue this conversation. All right. So as you can see by the results, as you look at this, it looks like, yes, we should organize small sets of webinars to help address this. This was as Bob had mentioned at the beginning, there was an overwhelmingly positive response to this webinar when we set out the invitation to everybody. We expected maybe 50 or so people, and we have well over 100 on the call today. Again, going through, serve as an online clearinghouse. Yes, which we are planning on doing, sort of putting up a repository of ideas and things that might be helpful to help support you and each other. So part of that last question was that to serve as an online clearinghouse for approaches, and it seems that nobody actually offered up any other ideas, but if you guys have other ideas, if you'd please use the chat function to kind of help share those, or if you'd like to raise your hand as well, we can also to unmute to speak and address everyone, that would be fine as well.
So Bob is on his way in, folks. We'll just give him another couple of minutes to join us and to close this out.
I'm going to address Mel Rodriguez's question. Would it be possible to share out who is participating in the forum by region? At this time, we could take a gander, but we only collected organizations and job functions. And so our intent is that if people would like to have the attendee list, that they need to email info@pathways to adult success. So as we continue through this PowerPoint and towards the final thoughts, we offer, use the chat box for final thoughts and questions. So and I do apologize that we're having technical difficulties with our dearest Bob, but we do invite you guys to send your follow-up ideas to Bob himself. His email is on the screen, and or Joanna Fox. And then from this, we will send out a recording of this session and a copy of the slides. In addition to everything that you guys have been placing in the chat box, we'll be sending out a list of references and materials to share with everyone. And we'll likely be building an online digital space as well to kind of to continue to have a repository to share out other resources that'll be shared over time. If you do want an attendee list, as I stated earlier, just the email is on your screen right now, but please email info@pathways to adult success, and we'll make sure to send that out to you as well.
Amanda, the screen that I'm seeing does not have the emails on. It's still stuck on the last question. Can you move it forward to that screen with the emails?
I did. Let's see here. Can you guys see
Amanda,
that?
can you hear me now?
We can hear Bob. Bob's back. Yay!
So go figure. I've been on 30 Zoom meetings since COVID-19, and the first one where got 120 people I'm leading is the one where the internet goes out. Live and learn. So Amanda, have you been able to move things forward?
I think we just need you to move us to the final slide. So we've moved kind of through the process, but that final slide with you and Joanna's email addresses is not up on the screen.
All right, let me see. I may have to do some.
There you go. Awesome.
All right. All right, well, I really want to thank everyone for participating today, for coming together as a learning community to figure out how to keep building pathways to adult success for all our kids, and in particular our seniors who are being impacted by COVID-19. I think we showed that there's still a lot of issues to work through, and even getting basic knowledge on what our state and district graduation requirements are under COVID, still uncertain. There was a lot of energy and inventive stuff about how to help kids that don't have a placement yet, and how to keep kids that do stay on track. A lot of vibrant community action happening, and some good inventive ideas that we will share around with everybody. We'll try to bring any and all resources shared today. We'll try to get those together and send them out to everybody, so they'll have those. We encourage folks just think of things or think of a resource after they get off to please send those in to us at the information provided here, so we can keep building this community and keep helping each other move along in these trying and challenging times. So I just thank you. We will send out the recording and a copy of the slides and a list of references and materials very quickly. And we just want you all to be well. Thank you for all the work you're doing on behalf of all the students who need you. And we'll just move onwards. Thank you.